If there's one thing actors are good at, it's acting. And evidently after that line, if there's one thing I'm bad at, it's writing introductions. But no, bear with me for a minute because there is something under the joke of that obvious comment that I'm trying to get at. And that's that most directors put their faith in their cast and trust them to deliver solid performances. But on the other hand, there are also directors who believe actors are idiots and incapable of actually acting to the exact standards they want. This list then is dedicated to those directors who believe that the best performances happen when the actors are deceived and conned, where they'll go to great lengths to willingly pull the wool over their actors' eyes, all for the sake of a good take. I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are 8 spectacular cons directors pulled off while shooting a movie. Number 8, Mel Brooks cons a legend into singing a spoof song, Blazing Saddles. Like the Zucker-Abraham Zucker trio and Edgar Wright after him, Mel Brooks' new realistic subject matter would make the lampoonery of a spoof movie even funnier. So when the time came to shoot a cowboy film, he knew he needed a convincing yet absurd theme song. Who Brooks had in mind for this was Frankie Lane, the singer of the classic western theme Rawhide, or at least somebody who sounded like the man. So he put his juicy little feelers out and was charmed when he found Lane himself saying that Blazing Saddles was a cool name for a western and he'd be happy to record a theme tune. Of course, Frankie thought this was just a regular western, so played the whole damn thing perfectly straight. Brooks kinda sorta neglected to tell him about the comedy so Lane would do something realistic, rather than phone it in for a spoof film. This, however, made for the perfect theme song, if only for its complete earnestness. Number 7, Sam Raimi tortures Alison Lohman with fake vomit, Drag Me to Hell. Drag Me to Hell was Sam Raimi's first stab at horror in 20 years. All about a regular woman being terrified haunted house at a carnival style by a gypsy sorceress who foists a demon on her for shaming her over her finances. In order to help lead actress Alison Lohman, Raimi borrowed a couple of tricks from his Evil Dead directing days. Namely, he terrified her for real, taking her through her own carnival ride and filming the result. With little more scene setting than "bad stuff's going to happen to you, please try to freak out," Raimi threw the metaphorical kitchen sink at Lohman, and probably a literal kitchen sink as well, giving her food with maggots in, which were actually pasta, don't worry, throwing bucket loads of fake blood at her, and making her fight in a muddy grave. Yet Raimi's crowning glory came when Lohman had to wrestle an animated corpse at a funeral. Though this was a comedic scene, after all, she's wrestling a corpse, he wanted the actress to actually be disgusted by the animatron, so resolved to fill its mouth with fake sick and not tell her about it until it threw up all over her face. The look of sickened shock you see on her face when this happens, well, that's Lohman's real reaction, miffed that Raimi had conned her once again. Number 6, Stanley Kubrick tells Slim Pickens and George C. Scott that they're not in a comedy, Dr. Strangelove. When crafting his first comedy, Kubrick knew he'd have a hard time getting satirical performances out of most of the serious character actors he'd cast. So with this in mind, Kubrick misled 2 of his biggest actors, Slim Pickens and George C. Scott. You may recognize Pickens as the man who rides the nuke down to the ground like a rodeo bull, yet the strange thing is, he didn't actually know he was giving a humorous performance. The auteur wanted a well-known cowboy actor to play the part, so passed the script on to Pickens with only his parts of the script, assuring him that it wasn't a comedy and that, in fact, he was playing the hero. His deception of George C. Scott, the actor behind General Turgidson, was equally born out of a web of lies. Scott thought he was playing a cerebral character and intended to give an understated, measured performance. Kubrick agreed with this, telling him it was a great idea and that he should, in fact, expend all of his excess emotion in a hammy, over-the-top first take. What the director failed to mention is that these were the takes that he was actually going to use, and he discarded Scott's intentional efforts. When he found out, Scott was apparently pretty livid, although it must have been pretty funny to watch him at the premiere. Number 5, Tobe Hooper drives everyone insane in The Heat, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filmed in the Texas summer of 1973, and this wasn't just any summer either. It was the kind of heatwave summer where you could fry an egg on Jules Gill's head. However, while the temperature meant the outdoor scenes were difficult, they had nothing on the indoor sequences. In 1900s, a board doubled for the Sawyer's Place, which was little more than a small poky place with barely any ventilation and stuffed with film equipment. There was also perishable food knocking about too, which rotted in the heat, creating an unbearable stench. Hooper, looking to get just the right shot in the final scene, chose to use this heat to his advantage. He shot the scene again and then again and then again and again and again, all during a 24-hour shoot, eventually mentally breaking everyone in the room through a combination of rotting food and the soaring heat. The worst part was that he totally did this on purpose, to make the family seem crazier and Marilyn Burns more deliriously frightened. In fact, many actors, including Leatherface's Gunnar Hansen, snapped and began believing they were actually their characters. I mean, this might just be me, but when you've got a chainsaw-wielding man believing he is in fact a bloodthirsty murderer, the con might have gone too far. Number 4. John Ford trolls a hungover Victor McLaglen to Oscar glory. The Informer. Unsurprisingly, for the man who once made Shirley Temple cry more effectively on camera by telling her that someone had run over her dog, John Ford could be a bit bonkers with how he wrung the last bit of talent out of his actors. And that didn't stop on The Informer, as Ford effectively acted like a massive tool to starve Victor McLaglen. He changed the shoot schedule at the last minute and informed the actor mid-take that his effort-filled performance didn't matter because they weren't filming. Yet the most colossal dick move Ford managed was to tell McLaglen when he had days off, only to rescind those breaks at the last minute the morning they were supposed to start. This is already bad, but bear in mind that much like everybody at the time, McLaglen loved himself a bit of the old booze, so would often be completely hungover when Ford came a-calling. Number 3. Terrence Young ambushes Sean Connery with real sharks. Thunderball. Now, nobody's really fond of sharks, and this goes doubly true when you're in the water with one about to bite your little peeper off. So when Sean bloody Connery says he doesn't like sharks, well, you believe him. But unfortunately for the former Bond, he had a rather lucrative day job as the iconic spy, meaning he occasionally had to swallow his phobias and look damn suave while doing it. Case in point, Thunderball, a film replete with a shark pool owned by the villainous Emilio Largo. Of course, you can't have a shark pool and not have someone end up in it, so 007 was required to take a dip with actual sharks. Now, even though Sean Connery was terrified, he was still game for it, having been informed by the director Terrence Young that he would indeed be protected from a tooth-related death by a large plexiglass tunnel. What the actor didn't know was that Young was outright lying to him. The director knew fine well he didn't have enough plexiglass to create a safe passage, but elected to not tell Connery that tiny little detail because he'd say hell freaking no to actually swimming with sharks. But Josh, I hear you ask, when did Connery actually find out what he was doing? Well, that was when he was in the water, actually being filmed. There's a reason 007 looks so panicked and jumps out of that water like a salmon on film, and that's because Sean Connery is actually bloody terrified. Number 2. The cast is terrified with a falling corpse. Wreck. Wreck's horror works so well in part because of its slow build, as it's a good 20-odd minutes until you actually see a zombie in this zombie film. Even then, none of the actors are quite sure what this monster is. In fact, the excrement only truly hits the turbine, to go all Victorian English on it, when the firefighter sent to look after the first zombie woman, who is on a high floor of the apartment block they're in, is sent tumbling into the lobby where the residents are arguing. It's a hell of a shock for the viewer, but what you might not know is that it was also pretty damn traumatizing for the actors as well. Because, yep, nobody knew that a realistic mannequin was being dropped on them from several floors up, which makes the directors both evil geniuses and shockingly blasé about their cast's safety. Number 1. Peter Farrelly guilts A-listers into starring in his terrible comedy, Movie 43. It's not exactly biting film criticism to say that movie 43 is one of the worst releases of the entire decade. The so-called comedy is made up of a bunch of different skits, such as Hugh Jackman having a pair of bollocks dangling from his chin and a new MP3 player called iBabe that takes the form of a naked woman. Or how very contemporary. By all accounts, the anthology would be totally uninteresting if not for the star power attached to it. Actors like Hugh Jackman, Kate Winslet, Liev Schreiber, Chris Pratt, Anna Faris, Emma Stone, Richard Gere, Uma Thurman, Halle Berry, Terrence Howard, Elizabeth Banks, Julianne Moore were all attached. So by now you're probably wondering why so many stars signed up for an obviously poor project, and that's because the producers essentially pressured them into it. Farrelly's mantra was apparently, quote, wait them out, shoot them when they want to shoot, guilt them to death, end quote. Sometimes that didn't work, and George Clooney in particular reportedly told him to shove it, but evidently not everyone had the same result.